Hey everyone, welcome back to Make the Music, and today I'm going to be doing a breakdown of how I got a Nolly periphery modern Djent style bass sound using some pretty basic plugins, available plugins that people have in their DAWs to get that really clanky, aggressive, distorted bass sound that we hear in these modern metal genres. Just a reminder, I have the Home Studio Toolbox. It's a free guide. You can find that in the description box down below. It gives you a bunch of things that you might need to help you get started making music in your home studio, and as well you'll get access to a bunch of tracks for videos I've done if you want to practice your mixing and get some production tips. Anyways, let's get into the video here. So I did a quick playthrough. Let me do another 5 seconds. So you're hearing my bass sound in the context of this mix. Here's what it sounds soloed. I felt like I got a pretty good sounding, modern metal, modern Djent, periphery styled bass sound, Nolly styled bass sound. He kind of pioneered it, definitely to an extent, especially on an album like Periphery 3, Select Difficulty. So I want to take you through what I'm doing to get this sound and my thought process behind it. So when it comes to a bass guitar sound for a super heavily, this is in drop C, right? For a drop C bass guitar sound, is we want two things at play here. One, we do want some of the direct input to come through, because when you add distortion to the entire bass guitar sound, what actually happens is those lower frequencies, especially the sub frequencies with the fundamental notes, if you think about a tuning like drop C, they get very distorted and actually the clarity starts to go away. So you want some of that direct input to come through into your sound. You want that to be the bass line or the bass for your fundamental notes. So no matter what you're doing with the bass, those fundamental notes are very consistent. They sound the same. They're the same volume, but you also want that distorted attack to feel like it's blending in with the rhythm guitars as well. So I started off with a Bias FX2 patch, and this is kind of a more complicated one. I have a blue compressor at the beginning of it, and you can do this in any amp sim software. I just use Bias FX2 a lot. And this is a Nolly bass sort of match here. It's matching the distortion channel of the Nolly bass. So I actually used, I think, the heavy metal Bias Amp 2 setting to match this. So I wasn't even necessarily trying to match the bass sound. I was trying to match the distortion channel of that. But if you add any amp with distortion, you should be able to achieve a very similar sound. Then I have just a standard, the GK800, which is a standard bass head going into like an amp head cabinet here with a C14 mic. This is just the match cab for the distortion channel, but it was important with the distortion channel that we do some filtering here. So you can see I have a high cut. This is around close to 22,000 hertz, and I have a bit of a low cut here. So I didn't want that distortion channel, it looks at 95 hertz, I didn't want that distortion channel to take up the entire frequency spectrum. You definitely don't want too much of the high highs, or else it's going to sound way too fizzy. And then the mixer here, I just have a little bit of the bass channel turned up. So if I turn off everything, here's what just this sounds like. It sounds pretty good, but it's definitely not all the way there, right? We've got some more work to do. And another important thing here is I have the mix knob at 64%. This means that there's a lot of DI getting through the signal, right? It's not all being processed by the amp, and that was very important here. You can obviously split your tracks, so you could have one track be an amp track, one track be a DI, and then mix the two together. People do that all the time. That totally works. I wanted to see if I could just get it on one track, and it just seemed to work well for me. Next, I'm using the virtual mix rack. And obviously, there's a video out there done by Nail the Mix Academy where they show some of the process for Nolly mixing his bass. So I try to use a similar approach there despite not having the same input or anything like that. So I'm using virtual mix rack. I'm using this, the Blue 76 here. That's doing between 10 to 15 dB gain reduction. I added a ton of top end. Look, I maxed out the silky meter here, or the silky knob, and added some punchy as well to get some more low end. And not a lot of EQ from this Neve style EQ, but that's the processing I have going on. Just felt the bass needed way more presence, especially in the context of the rest of the mix. Then I added this. This is actually another version of a stock Reaper EQ. I'm doing some subtle things here. I'm adding some low mids. I'm taking out some of the high highs and the low lows. Very subtle EQ. Nolly talks about a lot of times in the mixing videos how he wants the low end of the spectrum and the top end of the spectrum to have a similar amount of frequency, right? So it's a bit of mixing with the eyes here, but that's just a technique he uses, and I found that to be pretty accurate when I was mixing this as well. So you can see there's about equal lows and equal highs there, and that's kind of the concepts that he talks about anyways when mixing bass. Then I added another stock EQ. I took out like a lot of low mids, like 600 hertz-ish. That's kind of where the guitars were living in the track. And so I didn't want it to interfere too much with that, and then added a top shelf here of about 3 dB, so more top end. Felt like it added some much needed brightness. And then finally, this is a really important part here, is the limiter, because we want that fundamental DI note to be constant and consistent throughout the entire track. We don't want to feel like the bass part of the track is on edge and coming in and out, right? We want it to be very consistent. So here's what the limiter is doing. This is a Waves L1 limiter. So anywhere between 6 to 10 dB of limiting. I have it at 0.17 release, so fairly medium to quick release, and then negative 8.2 on the threshold, and then setting that ceiling where I wanted that bass guitar. Really, it was about setting it where it worked with the track. So if I turn on the rhythm guitars, Nolly talks about how he wants the bass to feel like an extension, just a lower extension of the rhythm guitars. That's why it has that distortion on it. And I feel like I accomplished that here and got a similar vibe there as well. So that's all the processing. If I take all of it off, and now I finally added it all back in with the track. There you go. So that's my approach to getting a Djent heavy, modern metal, Nolly sounding bass guitar with 5 quick, easy plugins there. I felt I got pretty close. So let me know in the comments, what do you do to get a modern bass, metal bass guitar sound? What plugins are you using? I know there's so many different approaches, and so many people have come up with great sounds a lot of different ways. So let me know down in the comments down below. Let me know if this video was helpful for you. And anyways, I will see you guys next time.